Harold and I were pretty much on the same page in thinking about how essential and also how impossible sometimes it is for us to imagine the descriptions that are so lovingly rendered in our sacred text, how concrete, how graphic, how explicit they are, with very particular shades and instructions and materials. But it's sort of up to the reader to transmit this auditory experience and then to imagine, literally to imagine, right? Because we have not had the opportunity to be at Ezekiel's altar or to be in the presence of priests who are dressed in the priestly vestments of Tetzaveh. So I wanted to embrace our Zoom experience because at CVST, I couldn't make you a 12-page handout lovingly rendered in full color of what these garments might look like. But friends, being at a place with not one, but two very full rabbinic bookshelves in Louisville, Kentucky that my parents have been lovingly collecting over the years, I want to show you this book. Don't worry, I'm going to screen share what's inside it. This is a rendering of the tabernacle. It was an Israel Museum exhibit from the 90s. And you can definitely Google all of the images I will show you for varying interpretations, but because Parshat Tetzaveh is so extremely specific, all of these images really look a lot alike and they haven't changed over time. So we can think about what it is that the priest would have worn and exactly how it might have been created and have a clear picture in our minds. But to get us started, what I would love is if you could think for yourself, what is a vestment of yours? What is an article of clothing or of jewelry or accessory that when you wear it really transforms the person that you are? Whether it is a piece of professional dress that immediately visually signifies to everybody who sees you what your profession is, or whether it's a beloved article that when you put it on, you are transported to a specific time and place when you wore it, or when you bought it, or who gave it to you. What are some of the holy articles that we wear in our lives? Because while these renderings of a uniform for a job description that doesn't really exist anymore can feel pretty far away, I think all of us can transport ourselves to that very same feeling that Aaron and his sons must have had when they put on their priestly vestments. So be thinking about it, put it in the chat. We're going to return to this question a little bit later. I just wanted to plant it within you as we look to these descriptions in our Torah portion. So I'm going to be honest with you, the entire Torah portion is not exclusively about the priestly garments. The reading that we did today, the one that Bill Rosenblum started us off with, is explicitly about the garments. Once you get to the end of the fourth Aliyah, we start kind of like switching tracks to the holy barbecue that God desires in terms of offerings, vegetarian and meat. There are some rams that are slaughtered in the making of this Torah portion, but there are also matzot, there are loaves of unleavened bread that are offered too, so you could have like divine pancakes. That's not what we're going to be thinking about so much this morning. I thought that we'd be more interested in seeing rather than smelling. Maybe when we're all back in person, we can experience the smell-o-vision of Parshat Tetzaveh. So I am sharing my screen. Everybody can see the glorious full outfit of our priests. Let me go into full view. It'll make it just a little bit bigger. That's pretty. There we go. So if you have any questions about what these would look like or certain details about them or observations that strike you that you'd like to share with the community, this is very reminiscent of something I've seen, I've always wondered about, virtually raise your hand. I'm going to ask cantorial intern Sam Rosen to be my TA and kind of keep an eye on the chat just in case there are like direct questions that we should be answering as a community. Sure. And we're going to zoom in on a couple of the pieces that were specifically mentioned in this week's Torah portion. But Harold, what were you thinking immediately? Didn't even have
I believe that it's the ephod on the the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol reminds me of the breastplate we put on our Torah scrolls.
Exactly. Well remembered, Harold. So, what Bill was chanting about in our very first triennial Aliyah this morning was the creation of the ephod. So, just to clarify, the ephod is this blue undergarment that the priests are wearing. The breastplate that Harold is talking about has its own very explicit and loving description, which is a little before what we read today. It's mostly a parsha back, but I'm going to get to it in a second because it is so important and so stunning. What Bill was reading about was a blue article of clothing that goes over this white under tunic. Only the high priest gets to wear. Everybody gets to wear these white clothes. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why on Yom Kippur, not only to signify the purity of our souls to which we aspire, but also because we are in the presence of the Kodesh Kodashim, we are sort of outfitting ourselves like the priests, that we would wear white underneath. But this blue piece, as Bill chanted it, is supposed to be an overcoat with just a hole for the head that you put over your head. It's supposed to be like a coat of mail, which is an interesting translation interpretation. And think about how challenging it must have been when you get to the Septuagint and every translation forward. How do you describe this of clothing? What are the key words that you can put into your interpretation that will make people think, that's what it must have looked like? Bill also loved to describe the hem of this garment, which is supposed to be alternating with gold and little pomegranates. It's supposed to have both a decorative aspect and also a practical aspect to make sure that the garment doesn't tear. So specifically, it says, on the skirts of this garment, down here, this general vicinity, you shall have pomegranates of blue and purple and of scarlet and bells of gold between them, so you could hear the priests working. They're always accompanied music. And the sound shall be heard when Aaron goes into the holy place before Adonai, and when he comes out, so that he doesn't die. Perhaps this is, I hate to be so irreverent, but it's like a priestly kitty bell that God can hear when the priest is coming, because we know that not everybody is allowed into Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies, and the people who are not allowed, who go in there, meet very, very fiery ends. So this is why Aaron needs to have this special hem to his garment. There were 36 bells and 36 pomegranates alternating at the bottom, 36 being such an auspicious number. But this is what Rashi interprets as. So we already have like a whole history of gematria, the sacred numerology of the Jewish people. Every Hebrew letter also has a numeric equivalent. And so 36 is double chai, double life. So that's why when Rashi thinks about what this must have looked like, and a lot of details that we get, these garments come from Rashi, he thinks that it had to alternate with 36 of each type of hem. Next, let's talk about this breastplate a little bit. So you can see, and it's really lovingly described in the previous Torah, that you have 12 of these precious gemstones. And each of these gemstones is supposed to symbolize one of the 12 tribes of Israel, one of Jacob's 12 sons. There is not a gemstone for Dinah. Each gemstone is particular in its description, and many of them we're pretty sure are things that we would also recognize when we think of semi-precious gems, things like amethyst and carnelian and emeralds and sapphires. Some of them have very, very challenging Hebrew words associated with them. Some of them are hapax legomena, that the word doesn't really show up. A hapax would literally be, it's the only time this word is used in that particular body of literature. And sometimes you do get a couple of repetitions of these gems, and definitely in context, they're being described as gemstones. So we have more idea of what they might have looked like, but it's up to commentators like Rashi and moving forward to really figure out, of all the beautiful stones that you could ascribe to each tribe, what is the exact stone, especially if you want to remake this for when the temple is rebuilt and somebody needs to be wearing this glorious outfit. Eli Podosinsky Mertzel had Tetzaveh as his Torah portion for his bar mitzvah, and his essential question was, why does each tribe get associated with like this specific color or this specific gemstone? And in our research of Midrashim, we didn't really find exactly why, but they are in birth order in representation. And if anybody ever discovers, why is it that emerald represents this tribe in particular, Eli and I would really like to know. So this hangs over the ephod as a separate garment, and Harold's absolutely right. The garments of the Torah scroll are some of the clearest parallels that we can see, and this is purposeful, dear friends, of what the priestly garments might have looked like. And so the Torah also wears, a sacred skirted garment, its mantle. We just don't take a Torah scroll out of the ark not wearing anything. And these are all beautifully created articles of clothing at CBST. They were done with a lot of love and care, and pretty much every synagogue, you can sort of see the story of the synagogue in the Torah's dress, and the breastplates that hang on a Torah scroll are exactly supposed to mirror these breastplates that the priests wore. It's not as common that you see Torah breastplates that have these inlaid stones. That was very common in like 20th century Torah design. But now you get more representational. You get lions, you get columns, and you get sacred words written on the breastplate. If we zoom in a little further, you can see this breastplate. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about is the miter. And I think the word is like, yeah, Sam Rosen is already trying to smile and not look extremely anxious about the high holidays when he has to wear a miter, which is modeled on this same hat that the priest would wear. And when you're talking about the high priest specifically, so whether it's Aaron or his sons, both of them are wearing miters of fine linen. This is something that we chanted today. They're supposed to bring splendor and beauty to their heads. And this is the keter of the Torah. This is why Torahs wear crowns. You are supposed to, even if you are the high priest and you're wearing this, this headpiece that we're going to talk about in a second, see how there's a little space in between the end of the miter and the beginning of the headpiece. This is, Rashi says, so that the priest could also wear tefillin. And it's supposed to fall exactly where tefillin do, at the start of your hairline. And this also helps us understand, should the miter go all the way down to the priest's eyebrows? No, it should not. Should it be like a kippah and not totally cover the head? No, it should not. There should be just enough space for you to be able to put your tefillin, your phylacteries, between the end of the miter and the beginning of the headpiece. And then we're going to go back so that we can look at this headpiece in all of its glory. This is a plate of pure gold. Engrave upon it, Kadosh Ladonai. And so you can probably see some of the antecedents of the Hebrew characters that we have today. The Hebrew characters that we read today are very much influenced by Aramaic, but the Israel Museum also had a magnificent exhibit about the history of Hebrew letters and how they move from biblical Hebrew letters. And if you think about like how letters were created, we weren't using quill and ink, we were carving. And so they're made up mostly of straight lines. Some of them look very, very similar to the ones we see today, like the shin. That isn't the original version of the shin. The original versions of Hebrew letters were like pictographs. They were like hieroglyphics that would indicate some sort of like mnemonic device about which letter stood for which thing. So an ayin was actually shaped like an eye, and then over time it sort of tilted itself vertical instead of horizontal. So that's why you can sort of see kuf daled shin, but it doesn't look exactly like the daled that we're used to. It doesn't look exactly like the lamed that we're used to. Kodesh Ladonai, holy to God. You shall put it on threads of blue, not just any blue, but techelet, which is a major ingredient in the creation of the ephod and the creation of these connecting ties to hold the headpiece in place. Techelet is one of these extremely sacred Jewish articles that has an unkosher source. Some of you may have been subjected to my Hold of Our Torah about Techelet and the fact that it comes from a sea snail, a murex snail, usually associated with the shores of Tyre, which are in modern day Lebanon. And that's why when it's translated, Harold will correct me if it's Greek or Latin, we call it Tyrian blue or Tyrian purple, an imperial color. And it took a lot of squishing and stomping of sea snails to get enough of their mucus to be able to make this dye. So it's an incredibly, incredibly expensive ingredient, and you're not even allowed to eat the snails. But it's supposed to be so beautifully sky blue. And it's included in lots of our most important garments, including our tzitzit. That's why in the Ve'ahavta we say patil techelet, a thread of blue should run through these tzitzit. So just to recap, only the high priest gets to wear this beautiful headpiece. All of the priestly class get to wear these pure white linen miters. And it's kind of funny considering the job description of the priest is usually quite messy, as later aliyot in our particular Torah reading examined that there's a lot of oil anointing, there's some ram quartering and barbecuing that has to go on. So I can only imagine the sort of laundry that had to be done. But each of these colors and each of these articles is so beautifully significant. And the fact that the priest would have to put on this professional garb that elevated, we can only imagine not only their exterior, but their interior. What might it felt like? Imagine that you're dressed up like a Torah scroll if you don't have an easy on-ramp to what this feeling might have given you, wearing these beautiful clothes, wearing all of these rich ingredients. The children of Israel brought these ingredients from Egypt. They may or may not have consensually or unconsensually, indefinitely borrowed them from their Egyptian neighbors as a source of reparations. These were also the materials that we took to create the holy space of the Mishkan, the traveling tabernacle. And every Israelite gave as their heart moved them, as Cooperberg Rittmaster rabbinical intern Dave Yedid taught us last Liberal Minyan about the different ways, he taught us last week at TEM about the different ways that we give, and everybody gave of their best so that the priests, who were these representatives of the children of Israel serving God directly, could be dressed the most beautifully, the most exquisitely, and explicitly following God's very, very clear instructions. So I'm going to stop our share for a minute. And I wanted to return to that initial question. What is the article that you wear, whether it's a piece of jewelry like the breastplate or like the headpiece, whether it's an article of clothing like the tunic or like the ephod, whether it's the hat of your favorite sports team that when you're surrounded by everybody else in the stadium, all of a sudden you have a collective identity. What are some of those things that transport and transcend who you are when you put them on your body? If anybody would like to share out loud, virtually raise your hand, or you can physically raise your hand because now I can see you. Liz Saporetto, what is the thing that came to your mind? Hang on, you're not yet muted. I have asked you to unmute. There we go. Go ahead.
Okay, it's got to be my Emmanuel Tallis, my new Emmanuel Tallis with the
You're
kippah
wearing
to match.
today.
Yes, it's wonderful.
It is wonderful, and that's the same designer who creates the Women of the Wall talitot, so I already love it. But what is it about it, and who do you become when you put it on?
It's holy, so it's got a lot of prayers in it so far, and I'm in a different place when I put on my tallis. I'm in a very different place. It's not a mundane garment, not a mundane garment at all. And, it doesn't have a blue thread in the tzitzit. And I thought maybe I said, is that kosher? And I looked at everyone else's talent, right? I
Yeah.
looked at everyone else's talent and talis, and they don't have blue threads either.
An Ashkenazi custom that all the threads are white. And it's not uncommon in Sephardic and Mizrahi communities that you literally do have a blue thread. I teach about this with our family B'nai Mitzvah class, but Hirschman Wilsons and Frank learners don't get excited. We're not learning about it today, but I have a great YouTube video that I can share that explains why some and not others. So Liz, if you write to me, I'll send it right back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
People who have articles of their garments that transport them into different elevations of their souls. I think the first person I saw was Marilyn, and I'm going to ask everybody, like 2 sentences so that everybody gets to share. Okay, 2 sentences, Marilyn. What is the thing that you put on?
My tango shoes and this blouse that I got at a thrift shop that make me feel like a dancer when I really don't think I am a dancer, but it makes me feel open to that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marilyn. Sarah Barron, how about you? What is your sacred article? Oh, did I successfully ask you to unmute?
Yeah. I have a dress that I started wearing for job interviews over the summer. And when it got to be winter, I just added a sweater because it makes me feel totally professional, makes me a social worker. And because it does that, it's my policy not to wear it on Shabbos, even though it would look very nice.
Beautiful. And I can totally resonate. I don't know for some people if it is, as Sarah describes, a dress or the power suit or the heels or the tie, the thing that like shapes who you are and says, this is my professional aspect that I am showing to the world. Thank you, Sarah. Shy. Whoops. Sorry, my Zoom screen keeps moving around. Shy. 2 sentences. What do you wear that transforms?
I guess what I wear is not so much a physical object, but I guess for me, I sort of like putting on my identity as an HIV positive person in the work that I do, like being able to share that with people. I think that's sort of my it's like the mantle that I carry that kind of gives me a lot of like purpose and intention, kavanah in various things.
I love the way that you described, it's the metaphor of the mantle. You really are putting something on that people now see and witness about you, but it's not physical. That's beautiful. Thank you. Mitchell, who is literally an expert on this subject, if you didn't see what he shared in the chat, he with his costuming background. Tell us, Mitchell, just a couple sentences. What is your sacred article, your sacred?
It's got to be this bow tie, which was given to me by one of my best friends who died of ovarian cancer in October. And it had belonged to her late brother's late partner. So I feel like there are so many layers connected with this bow tie of people I knew. And whenever I get like chased down the street and people on the subway and guys in newsstands, everybody just has this reaction to it. So I do feel special.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And so many of you have put in the chat, it's an article that was given to you by someone, and it's the relationship that adds to the sacred nature of that vestment. I'm also seeing in the chat, numbers of people have mentioned their binders that transform their bodies into the way that they show the world who they are. And I think that is a beautiful, beautiful LGBTQ community special sacred vestment. Peter Klein, what is your sacred vestment? Yeah, you were describing it in the chat. So if I'm limiting you to only 2 sentences, everybody look for Peter's longer description in the chat. But you are not yet unmuted, my dear. Try again. There we go.
We're good. I have 2 pieces of my mother's jewelry, my late mother, and neither of them are particularly precious, except in that she wore them her entire married life. And one of them is this scimitar that comes from the Jungle Book created by Alexander Coda. and all of my cousins and nieces want it. I wear it under the lapel of whatever suit I'm wearing, so my mother stays close to me.
That's beautiful. And I think that there is that sense of closeness. Like there is nothing more intimate that sits next to our skin and our heartbeats. I think that can be definitely identified in these priestly vestments, that when you put them on, and when we talk about the vestments that those of us who are not genetically priest get to wear, the talit tot, the talit katan, the phylacteries, the tefillin, the kippah, the fact that they are so close to us, they are warmed by our skin, is something that brings us closer to God. Thank you, Peter. Joel Moses, what is your priestly garment?
Actually, I love putting on tefillin. I do it every day. It's feels like when I feel like a personal God, when I do feel that God's personal, it feels like God's, and like he or she is surrounding me, and whether it's subjective or not, I have that feeling very strong when I put on tefillin.
Perfect. That's amazing. And I think that's why they are created the way that they are, the way that this talit enfolds us, the way that tefillin like slightly constrict us so we can't forget that they're there. All of these things. Beautiful. Sarah Sloan, tell us about your garment.
It's ironic that I'm coming right after Joel, because mine is also tefillin. I started putting them on when I retired about 17, 18 years ago. And to me, they're both a symbol of my retirement, my leisure to daven as I wish and as long as I want in the morning. But also I daven in a few Zoom weekday minyanim where most people wear tefillin, and it's a link to them. It's also an expression of freedom, because all the years I was growing up, women definitively did not wear tefillin.
Oh, Sarah, I was hoping you would say that, because the amazing thing about garments and vestments is their ability to unify us. In putting them on, we are able to pass, but also the subversive nature of what we wear, the purposeful separation that we might create, saying, I am not as you expect me to be, or I am as you expect me to be, despite of, or in fact, because of the way that I dress myself. I also really liked, Jessica Balk-Jones shared in the chat a marvelous Broadway musical interpretation of this Torah portion, My Strongest Suit, from the musical and also the opera Aida, but there wasn't that particular song in the opera. This is why reinterpretation and innovation is always welcome in sacred texts such as opera and Torah. Okay, I'm going to call on Dorina and then Sarah Hirschhorn. Sarah, I do see your hand up, but I'm going to bring us to a close once everybody's gotten to share once. So Dorina, tell us all about your sacred article, briefly.
Can you see my pride bracelets, which I make myself? And this one has been with me to the Sofia Pride March several times.
Amazing. And Dorina, what I love that you have brought to broaden our definition is those articles that we create ourselves, in all of their perfection or imperfection, the kind of labor we have to put in to create something that we can wear with pride. Beautiful. Thank you. And finally, Sarah Hirschhorn, go right ahead.
It was briefly mentioned, but I love putting on heels. Like, even if I'm in a suit, there's nothing quite like that boost of confidence that I get when I put on a pair of heels. Whenever I'm like, for instance, when I had my internship, when I would put on a pair of heels and walk to the courthouse for the judge I was extraining, I just felt so confident. And so I can do this. I'm ready to get down and get work done.
Amazing. Thank you. And Sarah, I totally resonate with that feeling, as uncomfortable as heels can be for all of us of every gender who wear them. They're sort of like a synesthetic experience, that the sound your feet make, or the sound that somebody else's feet make when they're wearing high heels, which I also think is kind of subversive, because of course, like they're meant to like create a certain look of the leg and the way that we expect a woman's legs to look. And they're also very binding, so you can't like run so fast. But I can tell you that as a 7th grade teacher walking the halls of, I was working in Roxbury, Dorchester in a middle school, and the way the kids would scatter when they hear the teacher shoes coming down the hall. And everybody, like, they transcend whoever they are, because like the teacher is there. The way that click kind of echoes, it's a very sacred sound. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for opening up these aspects of yourself in all of their holiness and all of their transcendence, to bring ourselves into these priestly garments. I will cite the book with its images that I was using in the chat. And again, you know, any basic Google search will give you like fairly common, you know, threads, I mean that both literally and figuratively, threads that run through the visual representations of these garments, because they are so lovingly, carefully, and lengthily described in our Torah parashiot, of what it means to be Kodesh Ladonai, holy to God, and what you wear to enter Kodesh Kodashim, the Holy of Holies. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.